Well, CBS 42 and the Next Round Live are teaming up for a new segment called The First Look. Chris Breece, CBS 42, Jim Dunaway, and Lance Taylor, the Next Round Live. Do you guys know the premise of this topic we're doing here this year?
I don't know yet. Do you know?
I got no idea.
Yeah. All right. So we're calling it The First Look. And what we're going to do is each week I'm going to give you guys a topic that you know well about. And you're going to get your gut reaction of what we're talking about each week off the cuff. I know what it is, and you don't. This year in college football, we had a lot of people saying, well, Alabama and Ohio State, who should have been number 4? Georgia and Michigan, the only 2 undefeated teams, who should have been number 1? Obviously, it was Georgia at the end. And people always talk about what would happen if Michigan and Ohio State took an SEC schedule. So what I'm going to do, your first look this week, what if Michigan took Georgia's schedule?
Do I pass this down?
Pass it down.
Okay.
What if Michigan took Georgia's schedule and Ohio State took Alabama's schedule? Georgia's out, Alabama's out. They're playing all these teams the exact same time of the year they played them. So Michigan played South Carolina in September. They didn't play them when they beat 2 top 7 teams and kicked them out of the playoff, okay? When they played them in the elements they played them, what would their records be in the SEC? And when we're all done, we're going to see who won the East, who won the West, in all of our opinions, who matched up in the SEC championship game, and who won the SEC championship game.
Okay. I like this.
I got it, yeah.
Yeah.
I love hypotheticals.
Okay, and we have a non-conference in here, obviously from Michigan starting there, with Oregon. What do you guys think? Even though it's not counting for SEC.
Well, that was Georgia 49-3. If you go back to that, what would it be like with Michigan playing that game instead of Georgia?
It would have been 49-3, but I think they win the game by 3 or 4 touchdowns because this was Dan Lanning getting his footing. Dillingham and Bo Nix back together for their first game. They were just kind of out of sorts. And I know Georgia overwhelmed them, but remember Michigan was playing some of their best football in September. So
they played Hawaii and UConn, and I get what you're saying. I'd say Michigan 10 to 15 points. You think that high? I say 10 to 15 points.
Well, I'm just looking at 49-3 is hard to get past. They win the game by double digits. Michigan wins the game.
That number, by the way, is what Georgia won the games by. I should have clarified that.
No, absolutely.
That's what Georgia won those games by. So we're all going to win for Michigan over Oregon.
I would go win by Michigan, but I'm closer to what you're saying, and I don't know where Lance is going to hold down because Michigan was still trying to figure out who their quarterback was going to be. They were letting it play out. I personally think Jim Harbaugh would have decided on J.J. McCarthy in camp instead of letting it play out those first 2 games. But I don't think it would have been the same dominant performance from J.J. McCarthy. He got his swagger late in the year. I would have had this. They probably scored touchdown, maybe 2. The crowd wouldn't have been as crazy. I would have said this about a 17-point Michigan win.
The other thing I would say, Chris, is Oregon was not a physical team this year.
No, they would have ran it down their throats.
Michigan, not that they had a ton of athletes, at least when you compare it to Georgia, but Michigan was still a really physical team. So I think Blake Corum would have had a lot of success against that Oregon defense.
35-17 for me. 35-17.
Agreed. Which is why South Carolina to me is fascinating because Michigan ran what they did whenever they wanted against the Big Ten. Call it Oregon too, if that would have been the case in that game. I've got Michigan at South Carolina the way that they historically do under Jim Harbaugh in September, getting their feet wet on the road in the SEC. I don't know if they would have won that game. I'm going to toss up on that.
Okay, the problem with South Carolina in September is they weren't good.
Yeah.
They got really good in November. So September, South Carolina loses to this Michigan team. And let's go back to last year's Michigan team that lost in the semifinals to Georgia. That was still a team that represented the Big Ten, won the conference, went to a college football playoff. So it's not like this was their first year. I mean, their expectation coming into the season was to win a championship, a national championship. So Michigan was already ready in September. South Carolina's still baking.
But this is where the SEC starts bragging.
Could
SEC
Michigan run the ball on South Carolina?
Yeah, and SEC on the road, night games on the road, and this ended up being 11 o'clock out of game day. But if it had been Michigan and South Carolina, I think it would have been a prime time game. This would have been closer than what Georgia was as well, but I still like Michigan. I go back to about the same score, 35-17 as the Oregon.
Yeah, I think comfortable win Michigan.
You guys convinced me. I was going to maybe go South Carolina. I'll go Michigan too. So 2-0, and these are the big games, by the way. There's 7 biggest games, 8 biggest games. Auburn, what's to say at home? That's a win.
Well, personally, at Jordan-Hare Stadium is where
Way different.
is where Penn State went to play Auburn,
Yeah.
and they ran it through them like a knife through hot knife through butter. That's exactly what Michigan would have done to them. So I think it would have been exactly the same score as what Georgia did, what Penn State did to Auburn. I think Michigan would have done the same thing.
Yeah, and Harsin was coaching, and T.J. Finley was quarterbacking, right?
Yeah.
So I think we have about the same result.
Florida, same thing. Neutral site, doesn't matter to me. Florida was a mess.
Yeah.
3 wins.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now it gets interesting.
Because the game is at Michigan. We're getting into November here. Keep that in mind. And Tennessee's coming off the biggest win ever, maybe the biggest win in program history. Going to Michigan, look, they're going to put up points. They're going to have 500 yards. Michigan's defense is going to be running around with their tails cut off, wondering how to stop Jalen Hyatt and how to stop Hooker. I think it's close. I think Michigan at the end figures out a way to win only because it's at home. I had Michigan for a close win.
This is where Jimmy SEC is going to step up here. I think Tennessee wins this game against Michigan, and I think it ends up looking a lot like what TCU did to Michigan in the semifinal game.
At Michigan.
They just do it differently, though. I'm still going to go with Tennessee in this one. All due respect to the atmosphere in Michigan, I think the Volunteers with their receivers, Hendon Hooker healthy going into this game, Tennessee wins this game.
Oh, boy, this one's tough.
It's tough because it's at Michigan.
Yeah.
If this is at Tennessee, I
I
wouldn't
would-
give Michigan within 7 points.
Yeah, I would agree with you. But Tennessee, when healthy, when at 100%, I think Tennessee was a top 5 team this year. And Michigan was too, obviously. This one's tight. I am going to lean Michigan. Michigan in overtime by 3.
Okay.
Michigan in overtime. I'll take Tennessee in a wild game, something like 38-34, 38-31.
It's cold outside, by the way, in November. And it wouldn't be the case the next week against Mississippi State. That's where I think Michigan gets the loss right there, only because on the road, I think Mississippi State would come up and make enough plays at the end. Typical Jim Harbaugh. Lose one game on the road, you're always supposed to win. Michigan in general has always done that, Jim. They call you a Bammer.
Right.
I'm a Michigan Bammer.
Okay.
Bammer. Even I believe that Michigan would have struggled with Mississippi State. If I wasn't going to take the South Carolina loss, I'm going to take the Mississippi State loss.
Well, I mean, you do have if you're not used to the air raid that Mike Leach throws at you, I think a lot of coaches in the SEC have adjusted to this. So teams like Alabama and Georgia, I don't think sweat Mississippi State and Mike Leach's offense, the late Mike Leach. But I still think Michigan would have won this game with their running game.
I think Michigan coming off that overtime battle against Tennessee, I think
He knows how to play the game.
Mississippi State would really stress this defense with that air raid. I think Will Rogers, I agree with you. I think in Starkville, this would be that trap game. I've got Mississippi State winning a tight game where Michigan comes out a little flat.
At Kentucky was the game where I think people started to think about Georgia and being like, oh, are they really that good? You look at all these other big games, they walloped everybody. Then Kentucky happened. Missouri, too, obviously. Michigan against Kentucky, I see it the exact same way as Michigan played at Iowa earlier in the year. Will Levis didn't play when they played Iowa, obviously. He did play in this game against Georgia. Michigan close, 16-6 Georgia. I would probably put Michigan by a field goal.
Yeah, it would feel a lot like a Michigan-Illinois game
There
for
you
me.
go.
You know what I mean? It'll
Yeah.
be really hard for typical Big Ten game. I mean, Kentucky's Big Ten of the SEC.
I know Kentucky had the next Peyton Manning and Will Levis, but Kentucky's offense wasn't going to score a lot against Michigan. I could see the score be around the same, 16-6, but I think Michigan definitely beats Kentucky.
Okay, so when we look this up, I'm going to go by the seat of our pants here on what the SEC East records were. We're not going to go to the championship because we don't know if Michigan's in the championship yet. So, Lance, on your note, you had every victory for Michigan except for Mississippi State,
Yep,
which
so I
would
got them
put them
7-1 in conference.
7-1, and that means they beat Tennessee and they won the tiebreaker. Michigan goes to the SEC championship for you.
Yep.
Correct?
Yeah. Not
Jim,
for me.
Not for you because they lost the tiebreaker to Tennessee.
That's right.
Tennessee would have had one loss to South Carolina, wouldn't have mattered.
Right.
They would have went 7-1, but Tennessee is your champion. Lance, you and I were the identical. So you and I both had 7-1 Michigan, all 7-1 Michigan. You had Tennessee for a tiebreaker. That's Michigan in the East. Turn the page.
Where does Ohio State play?
Ohio State's got
Are they also in-
Alabama's schedule.
Oh, so Ohio State's in the West.
Because Michigan and Georgia were compared this year, and Ohio State and Alabama were compared this year because they were competing for that 4 spot. Keep in mind how Ohio State played games this year. Don't look at the team that should have beat Georgia. Don't. Because if that was that team, every single one of these games would be a win. Maybe not Tennessee.
Yeah.
But every single game would be a victory. Look at the way Ohio State played the whole entire year.
Yeah.
I think you look at Texas and Arkansas, really close.
See, I disagree. I think
Really?
even when Ohio State early in the year with the way they were playing, I believe their defense and their receivers would have caused – that was Alabama's problem in Austin is their receivers didn't really stress Texas's defense.
Good point.
And I do think that Harrison and Njigba would have stressed Texas's defense. I think Ohio State beats Texas more, by more points than Alabama did in Austin.
I had a victory, but close.
I would say Ohio State by double digits.
Me too.
Yeah.
Even though they can't run the ball. How about against Arkansas, a team who wants to stop running the ball?
Again, you got to remember that Arkansas game is when Jalen Milroe comes in. And
Yeah.
Milroe was
Yeah.
able to give them fits running the football. So I think Ohio State wins that one going away.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it ends up being about the same score as Alabama and Arkansas, 49-26. That's about the same thing. I disagree with you. I like Ohio State in both those games.
I like them as well. I think they'd be close, though. Just the fact that they're on the road, number one, would be the biggest issue in an SEC environment. That's my whole thing. I got wins for both of those. Texas A&M, I don't know if we're going to argue on that one because
I think it'd be worse.
Yeah.
A&M was lucky to survive A&M, or Bama was lucky to survive A&M. I think Ohio State would walk them off the field.
Yeah, I do
See,
too.
I do too.
So Tennessee.
Now, Tennessee becomes interesting in Neyland. My first question, LT, is does Neyland Stadium and the fans, is it as crazy for the Ohio State game as it was for the Alabama game? Other than that, I think you got two teams that are a lot alike.
I was just
that
going
are
to
playing
say,
each
fair
other.
to say they're
Yeah.
the same team with maybe just a few different tweaks.
Yeah, I think the atmosphere would be great. I think it would be electric. It wouldn't be as venomous as it was because I was up in Knoxville for that game. I think you were there too, weren't
I
you?
was,
Dunaway?
yep.
I think Ohio State beats Tennessee. Alabama should have beaten Tennessee. So I've got Ohio State undefeated.
Yeah,
do.
but I think those two are a lot alike. I think it's
I do
just
too.
Ohio State is just Tennessee with better uniforms.
I agree. I have Tennessee winning that game. That's my first loss for Ohio State. You have Ohio State.
I have Ohio State winning.
You have
yeah.
Ohio State. Mississippi State at home, easy.
Yeah, I just don't think Mississippi State has the guns to keep up with Ohio State.
Yeah, we've already had Mississippi State's upset against Michigan. They're not beating Michigan and Ohio State.
They peaked. Nobody can do that. All right, LSU, very interesting game.
Tricky.
But I don't think LSU on offense was good enough to sustain what Ohio State would have thrown at them every single drive.
But this becomes life in the SEC, right?
Right.
Ohio State now has to quickly come back and go on the road to Baton Rouge after the crazy atmosphere in Knoxville, and I think they lose one road game.
Okay.
Is it at LSU? I would say Ohio State would lose one game in the SEC, so I'll take a loss at LSU.
Okay.
I think LSU gets
Now,
them.
That's your first
Jimmy
loss.
SEC. He just wants to make sure they're not unblemished here.
right.
Look, they're coming off Mississippi State. They're not coming off Tennessee.
Yeah.
So they've already come off that high in Neyland. They had the sloppy game against Mississippi State. They were able to win that game going away. I think they beat LSU. I'm with Breece. I don't
Okay.
think they can keep up offensively.
So Jim and I, just to keep note, have one loss. Lance has them undefeated, but they're going to Ole Miss.
Yeah.
Hey, look, Ryan Day, Lane Kiffin, Jackson Dart, C.J. Stroud. Too much offense. Ohio State wins that one.
I'll take Ohio State winning that one.
Mm-hmm.
But if you make me say they won at LSU, then they lose at Ole Miss.
Okay.
They lose one of those SEC
I
road
see what
games.
you're doing there.
Yeah,
Too much
okay.
talent in the SEC to win on the road as Lance rolls his eyes. Auburn, I'm sorry, victory at home. Auburn would keep it close.
Yeah.
Say they're their rival if we're doing this so hypothetical. It wouldn't matter to me.
Yeah, me either. Ohio State, all due respect, what Auburn was doing offensively at the end of the year and what Cadillac was doing, Ohio State would have beat them.
Ohio State wins that game easily.
Okay,
Yep.
so Lance has them undefeated.
Yep.
Ohio State wins the SEC West. Jim had one loss. It was to
Mine was to LSU.
yours was to LSU,
Yep.
and LSU lost to Texas A&M at the end of the year.
Yep.
So that means Ohio State would have made the SEC championship because LSU lost at the end.
My rematch. I would have had a rematch. Ohio State, Tennessee.
That would be a whole different. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
We're going to see it here in 2 minutes.
My SEC championship would be a
7-1
rematch.
Ohio
Ohio
State.
State, Tennessee.
Oh, man, your old man's going to be so disappointed that you've got a Big Ten team in the SEC championship. game.
Okay,
Now,
so
he's really going to be disappointed at me, and I think all SEC fans are.
You have Ohio State, Michigan for your SEC
so
championship?
let's go to the end here. Final topic here: SEC championship game. Lance has Michigan versus Ohio State. Jim has Tennessee and Ohio State, and I have Michigan and Ohio State.
Well, first off,
So you go first with yours.
I mean,
'cause you're different from us.
We're going to move that your game. We're going to move your game from Atlanta to Indianapolis, or we're going to keep playing it in Atlanta.
Put it in New York for all I care.
Yeah. My game, I'm going to go with the opposite of what happened in Knoxville, now neutral site. I'll ride with a Tennessee. I had what I have the first time. I had Ohio State.
You had Ohio State.
I think Tennessee gets them the second time. They're too much alike. They would split during the regular season. Tennessee wins the second one. They're SEC champs.
I am still blown away that Michigan won the regular season.
I
title
am
again.
too. It would never happen. Not never.
Yeah. Play
7 times out of 10, Ohio State wins that game.
I would agree. And it was just a terrible fourth quarter for Ohio State. And I think they really got in the heads of the Buckeyes. And to win back-to-back years after having such a long hiatus of not being able to win that game, I think Ohio State wins this game.
So Lance and I both have Big Ten teams winning the SEC. Jimmy SEC didn't.
Flag in the ground. Go Vols.
But I don't know anybody that would argue the fact that Ohio State and Michigan weren't top 5 teams.
I wouldn't either. But Tennessee healthy. If Georgia doesn't exist, which in what we're doing here is the way it works, Tennessee is good enough to be a college football playoff
No,
team.
I don't disagree. I mean, here's my top 5 if everybody was healthy. I mean, I would have still Georgia number 1.
Mm-hmm.
I would go Ohio State 2. I would go Alabama 3, Michigan 4, and then Tennessee 5.
Yeah, I agree.
And TCU, who played for the national championship, would be out of my top 5.
So in the way this works, Georgia and Alabama, they're no longer on earth. So then Tennessee's a playoff team. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And you know what? The one thing I just cannot wrap my head around, and because I'm a Big Ten guy. I'm a Michigan fan. I'll put it out there. Calling myself a Michibama, right?
Right.
I just don't think that kind of style of play every single week against, call it a little bit better talent in the SEC than the Big Ten. I just don't think it's going to happen every week for them. Something is going to happen, especially on the road, when you keep playing that over and over, that you're just not going to win all your games. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, it's really difficult to do. I mean, the SEC schedule, we've said it before, is kind of like the NFL. I mean, you can have a 3-14 team beat a 12-5 team. I mean, that's just, there's so much parity, there's so much talent. So I see what you guys are saying, but also remember, if Ohio State and Michigan were both in the SEC, they would have that click of talent a little bit more.
You're right. Better recruiting, perhaps. That's why it's hypotheticals.
I'm looking forward to next week when Breece makes Michael Jordan a PGA golfer.
You know what? Maybe we'll do that. That could be the first look next week. Jim Dunaway, Lance Taylor from The Next Round Live. Follow them on Facebook, YouTube, everything on social media, Twitter. Guys, thanks so much. We'll do it again next week.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Big Ten dominating the SEC.